The royal hall of Zeveria gleamed like liquid crystal beneath the three suns. Silver pillars reached up to the sky, and the air shimmered with the faint hum of alien energy. Every noble, soldier, and diplomat stood in perfect silence as the Queen of Zeveria entered, her gown flowing like starlight itself. Her expression was firm, proud, and cold. She had ruled an empire that stretched across galaxies, had silenced rebellions, had seen enemies kneel before her throne. But today, her heart was filled not with triumph, only anger. Because today, the Council of Peace had decided something she could not accept. Her daughter, Princess Lyra of Zeveria, the last light of their royal bloodline, was to be married to a human. The Queen's voice echoed through the hall, cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is not unity," she said, her tone sharp as crystal. "This is surrender." No one dared breathe. On the high platform, Lyra stood behind her mother, her hands trembling slightly, though her face remained calm. Her silver skin glowed softly under the suns. She was young, graceful, and kind-hearted, but she had learned early that emotions were a weakness in her mother's eyes. The Queen had raised her to be strong, unbending, and proud, and yet deep inside, Lyra's heart beat with quiet fear. The doors of the great hall opened. All heads turned. The Terran delegation entered, their steps firm and rhythmic. Among them walked the man who had been chosen to represent humanity, a man who was no prince, no noble, no politician, just a soldier, a human named Captain Ethan Cole. The moment he appeared, the room grew colder. The aliens whispered, their voices laced with disgust and curiosity. Humans were known across the stars for their violence, their defiance, and their unyielding will. To the Zeverians, they were unpredictable, wild creatures that refused to kneel before empires. And yet, here he was. Ethan's uniform was simple compared to the lavish robes around him. His face was rough, marked with old scars that told stories of wars fought and lost. His eyes were steady, calm, but they carried something ancient, something that made even the proudest Zeverian noble fall silent. He didn't bow deeply like the others. He only gave a respectful nod to the Queen. "Your Majesty." The Queen's lips tightened. "You are the human chosen for this arrangement." "Yes," Ethan said simply. His voice was low, steady, like stone beneath wind. "I am Captain Ethan Cole of the Terran Federation." The Queen's expression darkened. "And they send a soldier, not a statesman, not a scholar. Is this how humanity shows respect?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with quiet dignity. "They sent someone who understands the cost of peace." That single sentence echoed in the hall. Even the murmurs stopped. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had expected arrogance or fear, but there was none. His voice carried neither pride nor submission, only truth. The Queen leaned back on her throne, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think your kind can understand peace? Humanity is a species built on war. You scorch worlds, you conquer, you consume, you kill what you cannot understand." Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "You're not wrong," he said softly, "but that's why we value peace so much, because we've seen what happens when we lose it." A ripple of unease spread through the hall. It wasn't defiance, it was honesty, and that made it harder to hate. The Queen turned to her daughter. "Lyra, you will not speak to him, you will not stand near him. This union is a farce forced by politics. I will see it undone." "Yes, Mother," Lyra whispered automatically, but her eyes remained fixed on Ethan. He wasn't tall compared to the Zeverians, yet he stood like a mountain. Calm, silent, steady. When she looked into his eyes, she felt something unfamiliar, a strange warmth, almost painful in its intensity. For a moment, she forgot the crowd. She forgot the weight of her title. The hall faded away until there was only him, standing there with his quiet strength. And then, for reasons she couldn't explain, her heart froze. It wasn't fear, it wasn't shock. It was recognition of something deep and ancient that lived in the human soul, a spark that even her kind, with all their beauty and power, didn't possess. The Queen noticed the hesitation in her daughter's face and frowned. "What is it, Lyra?" The princess blinked, forcing herself to look away. "Nothing, Mother." But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. After the council session ended, the queen stormed back to her private chamber, her robes swirling with fury. "This cannot happen," she snapped to her advisors. "I will not let my daughter be tied to a species of savages." "Your Majesty," one of the elders said cautiously, "the Terrans are powerful. Their fleets hold half the trade routes. A marriage would ensure peace, perhaps for centuries." The queen's eyes narrowed. Peace with beasts is still slavery. Outside the chamber, Princess Lyra stood silently, listening. She should have agreed. She should have shared her mother's anger. But all she could think of was the human's eyes, steady, calm, full of a quiet sadness. He hadn't looked at her like a prize. He hadn't even tried to speak to her, but she remembered how his gaze never wavered, even under the queen's wrath. There was strength there, not loud or violent, but real. That night, she couldn't sleep. From her window, she looked out at the Terran fleet orbiting Zeveria. Their ships weren't elegant like hers. They were dark, scarred, built for survival, but they floated with purpose, like guardians instead of conquerors. She wondered what kind of people could build such things, fight endless wars, and still dream of peace. For the first time, she wanted to understand humans, not as enemies, not as allies, but as people. And far below, in the lower levels of the palace, Ethan sat alone in his quarters. He looked out at the alien stars and thought of Earth, its blue skies, its oceans, its broken continents still healing after centuries of war. He wasn't here for power or politics. He was here because peace needed a human face, even if that face was scarred. He didn't know that the alien princess couldn't stop thinking about him. He didn't know that her heart had paused the moment she saw him. He only knew one thing. Tomorrow he would stand before the queen again, and he would not break. Because he was human, and humanity's strength was never in their weapons, it was in their will. And though she was against the marriage now, fate had already started its quiet work. The moment Princess Lyra froze upon seeing the human, the story of two empires began to change forever. Morning came quietly to Zeveria. The city of glass and silver stretched across the horizon, shining beneath the light of three suns. The air was cool, almost sacred, and from the highest tower. Princess Lyra watched the dawn rise in silence. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the human, his calm expression, his scarred hands, those strange, deep eyes that didn't look away even when the whole court stared at him like an animal. It confused her. She had met countless alien diplomats, soldiers, and leaders, but none of them had left her heart beating like that. There was no charm in his face, no royal grace, yet something about him had made her freeze. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness," said her attendant softly, "the human ambassador requests audience. He has been assigned quarters near the East Garden. The council expects you to greet him." Lyra turned sharply. "They wish me to meet him again so soon." "Yes, Princess. The Queen has left for the council chambers. You will meet him alone." "Alone?" The word made her chest tighten. She didn't know if it was fear or curiosity, but either way, she nodded. "Prepare the East Garden," she said. The garden was quiet, except for the sound of water flowing through silver fountains. The flowers shimmered with faint bioluminescence, glowing softly like stars trapped in petals. It was one of Lyra's favorite places, beautiful, peaceful, untouched by politics. When Ethan Cole entered, she was already standing beside the fountain, dressed in a flowing robe of pale blue. Her long hair glimmered like frost under the suns. He stopped a few steps away, unsure if he should speak first. Then he gave a small nod. "Princess." His voice was calm, just as before. It carried no arrogance, only respect. "Captain Cole," she said slowly, studying him, "you're early." He gave a faint smile. Humans have a habit of showing up before trouble does. Her lips curved slightly, though she quickly hid it. "So you expect trouble already?" "In peace talks," he said, glancing at the shining towers. "Always." Lyra found herself watching him carefully. He wasn't what she expected of a human soldier. He didn't walk with pride or aggression. There was something heavy in his presence, like a storm that had long passed, leaving quiet strength behind. "You were chosen for this union," she said after a moment. "Why you?" Ethan looked up at the alien sky. "I fought in the Orion Wars. I saw what hatred does. I lost friends, good ones. After that, my commanders said I understood what peace really costs. Maybe that's why." Lyra lowered her gaze. "My mother doesn't believe peace can exist between our people. She says humans are dangerous." He met her eyes. "She's not wrong." She blinked in surprise. "You agree?" He nodded. "Humans are dangerous, but so is fire. Fire destroys, but it also warms. It depends on who holds it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The words hung in the air like a truth too heavy to ignore. Lyra felt something strange, respect, maybe even admiration for the man who spoke so plainly. "Do you hate us?" she asked softly. "For the wars, for the fear we caused?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I don't hate. I've seen enough of it. Your people fought for what they believed in. So did mine. That's not hate, it's pain." Lyra's chest tightened. His honesty was disarming. It made her feel small but safe. She took a slow breath. "When I saw you yesterday, I froze. I don't know why. Perhaps I expected you to look like a monster." Ethan gave a quiet laugh. "Some humans are. I've met a few myself." Lyra looked at him carefully. "But you're not." He didn't answer. He simply turned his gaze toward the fountain, watching the reflection of the suns on the water. "Maybe once I was," he murmured. Her voice softened. "What changed?" He turned to her then, and for the first time she saw a faint light in his eyes. "The war ended, and I realized the enemy wasn't the ones I fought, it was what war made of us." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had grown up hearing about glory, power, and royal duty, but this human spoke about loss, guilt, and forgiveness like they were sacred things. He was silent for a long time, then added, "Your people want peace, so do mine, but peace isn't made by treaties, it's made by people willing to trust." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too weak, so she simply nodded. Later that day, as the suns began to set, the Queen returned from the council. She entered the hall to find her daughter staring out the window, lost in thought. "You met the human," the Queen said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Lyra replied quietly. The Queen approached her slowly, and Lyra hesitated. "He's not what I expected." Her mother frowned. "He's still human. Do not let his quiet nature deceive you. They are all dangerous. That's what makes them strong and unstable." "But maybe that's what makes them real," Lyra whispered. The Queen froze. "What did you say?" Lyra turned to her mother. "You always taught me strength means control, perfection, and pride. But the human, he carries strength differently. It's quiet, but it feels alive." The Queen's eyes hardened. "Do not let curiosity become weakness, Lyra. You are my daughter. A Zevarian princess does not fall for illusion." Lyra bowed her head. "Yes, mother." But when the Queen left, her words faded like smoke. Lyra's mind was already elsewhere, back in the garden, hearing the human's voice again. She remembered how he didn't flinch under her questions, how his gaze never wavered, how his words didn't try to charm her, they only tried to understand. That night she sat on her balcony, her heart restless. In the distance, she could see the human quarters, small, simple structures built for temporary stay. She wondered if he was awake, looking at the same stars. For a moment, she thought she could feel it, his presence, his calm energy reaching across the cold night air. And she whispered to herself, maybe peace isn't built by kings or queens. Maybe it begins with people like him. Below in the quiet shadows, Ethan sat alone beside a small holographic projector showing Earth's sky, blue, bright, full of clouds. He smiled faintly. Somewhere above, an alien princess couldn't stop thinking about him. And though they were worlds apart in blood, in that shared silence, something fragile and new began to grow. Something that would change both their worlds forever. The days after their meeting passed in uneasy calm. Zevaria's skies were bright and endless, but beneath the shining surface of peace, Tension moved like a hidden storm. Captain Ethan Cole continued his quiet work among the palace guards. He trained beside them, studied their weapons, and spoke little. The alien soldiers watched him with suspicion at first, whispering among themselves, but they could not ignore the way he moved, efficient, steady, precise. His body carried the memory of war, and his every action showed control earned through pain. Princess Lyra often watched him from a distance. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. Yet every time he stood in the training yard, she felt her heart steady. He didn't shout or boast like the Xaverian warriors. He taught them calmly, showing how humans fought not with elegance, but with will. She had begun to understand something strange. Humans were fragile creatures, flesh, bone, blood. They lacked the crystal-hard skin of her kind, and yet somehow they stood taller. But peace is fragile, and in Xaveria there were many who hated it. The first explosion came at dusk. It started with a low hum that shook the air. Then, a ball of fire tore through the western sky. The palace alarms screamed. The glass towers trembled as shockwaves rolled through the capital. "Attack! The rebels have breached the outer shield," shouted a guard. The queen was rushed to the safe chamber deep within the palace. Courtiers screamed and scattered, but Lyra did not move. She stood frozen by the window, staring at the black smoke rising in the distance. Her heart pounded. Her people were dying. Without thinking, she turned and ran. "Princess, wait," shouted her attendants, but she ignored them. She sprinted down the marble corridors, her robe flowing behind her. She could hear the roar of engines, the scream of plasma fire. She had never seen war, not truly, but tonight she would. When she reached the courtyard, chaos was everywhere. Soldiers fired into the sky as rebel ships descended. The air shimmered with energy bursts. Buildings crumbled. The smell of burning metal filled her lungs. And there, amid the fire and smoke, she saw him. Ethan! He was already in battle gear, a rifle in his hands, his face set like iron. He was shouting orders, not in fear but in command. Alien soldiers, though older and stronger, obeyed him without question. There was something in his voice that cut through panic, something that demanded trust. "Captain Cole," she shouted, running toward him. He turned, eyes wide. "Princess, what are you doing here?" I had to help my people." Before she could finish, a plasma bolt exploded near them. The shockwave threw her off balance. Ethan dropped his rifle and lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. For a moment, time stopped. His arms were around her, shielding her body with his own. The heat from the blast burned his armor, but he didn't move until the danger passed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough but calm. Lyra shook her head, trembling. "No, but your arm." He looked down. His armor was scorched, his sleeve torn, blood dripping from a deep burn. He didn't seem to notice. "Stay close," he said, grabbing his weapon again. She hesitated. "You're bleeding." "Better me than you," he said simply, and turned toward the next wave of attackers. Lyra could barely breathe. Around them, Xaverian guards fought desperately, but the rebels were relentless. They moved like shadows, their armor black and jagged, their eyes burning with rage. Ethan raised his rifle, his aim deadly precise. Every shot counted. He didn't waste movement or energy. When his gun overheated, he switched to close combat, using his strength, his instincts, his training. She watched him move through fire like it was nothing. Every time someone fell, he was there to pull them back up. Every time hope seemed lost, his voice carried through the chaos, steady, unbroken. When one of the palace towers collapsed, the ground split open, separating them from the main gate. Lyra stumbled, falling to her knees. A rebel charged toward her with a glowing blade. "Lyra," Ethan shouted. He didn't think, he just ran. He reached her in seconds, slamming into the attacker with full force. The blade cut across his side, tearing through his armor. He winced but didn't stop. With one brutal strike, he disarmed the rebel and knocked him unconscious. Lyra looked up at him in shock. His blood was on her robe, dark against the blue silk. "You're hurt," she whispered. Ethan's breath came heavy, but his eyes stayed firm. I'll live. He grabbed her hand. We need to move, now. He led her through the ruins, using fallen walls as cover. His grip was strong and warm. For the first time in her life, the Princess of Zeveria was running, not as royalty, but as a survivor. When they reached the underground shelter, soldiers rushed to cover them. The Queen was there, surrounded by guards. Her eyes widened when she saw her daughter, bruised, covered in dust, and holding the human's hand. Lyra, the Queen cried, pulling her into an embrace. Then her gaze turned cold as she looked at Ethan. What is this? Why are you? He saved me, Lyra said quickly, her voice trembling. He protected me when no one else could. The Queen's expression faltered. She looked at the human, his armor cracked, his face smeared with blood and ash, yet his eyes still steady. You risked your life for her, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. She's not just your daughter, she's a symbol of peace. If she falls, so does everything we're fighting for. The Queen stared at him for a long moment. She wanted to find pride in his words or manipulation, but she found neither. There was only sincerity. Outside, the sounds of battle began to fade. The loyalist forces had pushed the rebels back. The city still burned, but Zeveria had survived. When the last explosion faded into silence, Lyra turned to Ethan. He was leaning against the wall, exhaustion written on his face. She walked toward him, her eyes shining. You fought for my people, she whispered, for me. He gave a faint smile. I fought for peace, princess, but I'd fight for you again if I had to. Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to speak, but the lump in her throat made it impossible, so she just placed her hand on his arm gently. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Rest now, the war over for tonight. As the suns rose once more over the scarred city, the Queen stood on the balcony, watching the smoke drift into the sky. Behind her, her daughter slept peacefully for the first time since the attack. And in the healing halls of the palace, the human captain sat alone, bandaging his wounds. He didn't care for titles or reward. He had done what he always did, stood between death and the innocent. But what he didn't know was this. That night, in the heart of Zeveria, Princess Lyra's view of humanity changed forever. The man she once feared had become the symbol of something she could no longer deny. The quiet power of HumanMight. The sun rose quietly over Zeveria the next morning, but the city no longer sparkled as before. Smoke still curled from the ruins. The great towers that once gleamed like glass were scarred by fire. The sounds of rebuilding echoed through the streets, machines humming, soldiers marching, healers whispering prayers. Inside the palace, silence reigned. The Queen stood alone in her private chamber, her reflection flickering across a wall of light. She was watching a holographic recording of the battle from the night before. The images were raw and brutal, her guards falling, explosions tearing through the courtyards. And then, in the middle of all that chaos, she saw him again. The human. Captain Ethan Cole. He wasn't fleeing or hiding. He was fighting, not for himself, not for power, but for them. He shielded her daughter, carried wounded soldiers to safety, and refused to leave even after being hit. The footage ended with him slumped against a wall, still keeping his weapon ready in case danger returned. The Queen turned off the screen, but her hands trembled. She hated the thought that a human, one of those wild creatures she had despised her entire life, had saved her daughter when so many of her own guards had failed. Her advisor entered quietly. Your Majesty, he said softly, the rebel leader has been captured. He confessed that the Terran presence here angered the extremists. They believed the human was a threat to Zeverian pride. The Queen's eyes narrowed, so they attacked because of him. Yes, but the advisor hesitated. They underestimated him. He saved more lives than any of our own commanders. Without him, Princess Lyra would not have survived. The Queen turned toward the window, her voice low. A human saved my daughter, a sentence I never thought I would hear. Down in the palace infirmary, Ethan sat on the edge of a recovery bed, wrapping his own bandages. He had refused medical assistance, saying he'd rather handle it himself. When the Zavarian healers insisted, he thanked them politely and continued anyway. When the queen entered, the room fell silent. The healers bowed and hurried out, leaving only her and the human. Ethan stood immediately, despite the pain in his side. "Your Majesty." The queen's cold gaze met his. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said, "You disobeyed orders. You risked your life where you should not have been. You exposed yourself to danger and brought my daughter with you." Ethan didn't defend himself. "Yes, I did." The queen's tone sharpened. "Why, you could have left. You could have waited for your soldiers, yet you ran toward the fire." He met her eyes calmly, because that's what humans do. The queen frowned. "You think that's bravery?" He shook his head. "No, it's just instinct. We protect. Sometimes it's foolish, sometimes it hurts us, but we can't help it. When someone's in danger, we run toward them, not away." The queen was silent. His words carried no arrogance, only truth. After a long pause, she asked quietly, "And you did not think of your own life?" He smiled faintly. "If peace means anything, it has to start with trust. Someone has to show it first. Maybe I was just trying to prove that we mean what we say." Something inside her shifted. For the first time, she saw not a soldier, not a human, but a man who had carried too many scars and still chose to protect. "You believe peace is worth dying for?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes, because we've already seen what war costs." Later that evening, the queen stood on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker back to life. Her daughter joined her quietly, wearing a simple robe instead of royal attire. The night wind carried the faint scent of smoke and new rain. "Mother," Lyra said softly, "the people are recovering. Ethan has been helping the engineers rebuild the shield generators." The queen's voice was distant. "He works without being asked." "Yes, he says it keeps his hands busy." Lyra smiled faintly. "He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it makes sense." The queen looked at her daughter with mixed emotions. "You've grown close to him." Lyra hesitated. I don't know if close is the right word, but he makes me see things differently. He's not like the stories we were told about humans." The queen turned her gaze toward the stars. "He shouldn't be here. He is a symbol of everything I once feared." Lyra took a deep breath. "Then maybe it's time we stop fearing." The queen's expression softened for the briefest moment. "You sound like your father," she murmured. Lyra looked surprised. "You never speak of him." "He believed in peace too," the queen said quietly, "but it cost him his life. I swore I would never make that mistake again." Lyra placed a gentle hand on her mother's arm. "Maybe this time it's not a mistake. Maybe this is what he would have wanted." The queen didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on the human's ship in the distance, glowing faintly under the moons. That night, unable to rest, the queen walked through the lower corridors of the palace. She stopped near the training grounds, where faint sounds of movement echoed through the dark. Ethan was there, practicing alone. His injuries were still fresh, yet he moved like a man who refused to stop. He swung a training staff, his strikes slow but precise. Each movement carried weight, purpose, pain, and discipline. She watched silently from the shadows. There was no pride in his face, no triumph, only focus. When he finally noticed her, he paused and lowered his weapon. "Couldn't sleep either," he said softly. The queen walked forward, her tone unreadable. "You fight even when there is no enemy." He gave a faint smile. "That's how humans survive. We keep moving. If we stop, the memories catch up." "Memories of war." He nodded, "and of the people we couldn't save." The queen looked at him for a long moment. "You carry guilt for lives lost, even those who weren't your own kind." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Life is life, doesn't matter what color the blood is." Something inside her cracked at those words. All her life, she had believed in bloodlines, in strength, in purity. Yet here stood a man from a world of chaos, speaking of unity with more truth than any noble ever had. She asked softly, "Do you hate us for calling your kind beasts?" He shook his head. "No, your Majesty, We've been called worse. Hate's a weight I stopped carrying a long time ago." For a moment, the great queen of Zeveria said nothing. Then she whispered, almost to herself, maybe I've carried it for too long." Ethan didn't reply. He simply bowed his head, as if acknowledging the pain behind her words. When she returned to her chamber, the queen found her daughter waiting by the window. Lyra's eyes were bright, full of hope and fear all at once. "Mother," she said quietly, "you spoke to him." "Yes," the queen replied, "and now I understand something I didn't before." "What is that?" The queen turned toward the stars. "That humanity's strength does not lie in their weapons, but in their hearts." She looked at her daughter, her voice softer than it had been in years. "I was wrong to judge him. Perhaps this union is not the end of Zeveria. Perhaps it is a beginning." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining. "He believes that too." The queen nodded slowly. "Then maybe, just maybe, I will see it through." And as the first light of dawn touched the palace walls, the queen whispered a single truth that would change her empire forever. Human might is not in conquest, it is in compassion. Days turned into weeks after the battle. The wounds of the city began to heal, but inside the palace, something else was quietly blooming. It wasn't part of any treaty or alliance. It wasn't written in ink or signed by ambassadors. It was something softer, something human, and something the princess of Zeveria had never felt before. Lyra found herself drawn to Ethan. It began with simple things. She would find him early in the morning, standing alone on the outer balcony, staring at the sunrise over the crimson clouds. Sometimes she would bring him a drink made from the local fruit, pretending it was a casual gesture. He always smiled, thanked her softly, and asked about her people. He never spoke about himself unless she asked. When he did, his stories were simple but heavy, about the quiet farms of Earth, about oceans that never ended, and about cities built from hope and ruin. One morning, as they stood side by side watching the city wake, Lyra spoke quietly. "On my world, we are taught that humans are unpredictable, dangerous, that you fight because you crave conflict." Ethan's gaze didn't leave the horizon. "We don't crave it, we just don't walk away when something worth fighting for is at stake." She looked at him curiously. "And what do you fight for?" He turned toward her, his eyes soft but tired. "For peace, for people who can't fight for themselves, for the ones who still believe the world can be better." Those words sank deep into her. For the first time, she realized that this human's strength wasn't in his muscles or weapons, but in his heart. That afternoon, Lyra brought him to the royal gardens, a sacred place few outsiders had ever seen. The air shimmered with silver pollen, and the flowers glowed faintly under the twin suns. Ethan looked around in quiet awe, as if he were standing inside a dream. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "It's older than our empire," she replied. "These trees were planted when our ancestors first learned to shape light into life. They believed that every living thing shares the same energy." He touched one of the glowing petals gently. "We believe something similar. We call it connection. We might look different, but we all breathe the same air, bleed the same way, and hope for the same things." Lyra smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why you scare us. You remind us that we are not so different." They walked slowly through the garden, their words quiet, almost sacred. The tension between their worlds faded for a moment, replaced by a strange comfort. She found herself laughing softly at his Earth stories, like the time he accidentally burned his breakfast during a mission because he forgot to take off his helmet. He laughed too, the sound light and human and utterly real. For a princess who had always been surrounded by formal voices and rehearsed words, that laughter felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. But peace never lasts long in a palace built on pride. The council began to whisper. They said the princess had grown too close to the Terran captain, that her kindness was weakness, that her late father's dream of peace was poisoning the empire. One evening, the queen summoned her daughter. "Lyra," she said firmly, "you are spending too much time with the human. The council is losing patience. They already doubt the treaty." Lyra stood tall, her voice calm but defiant. "He saved my life, mother. He saved our people. Does that count for nothing? The Queen's tone softened. It counts for much, but hearts and politics are not the same. You cannot let emotion cloud your duty. Lyra met her gaze. And if my duty is to see truth when others refuse to? The Queen turned away, troubled. You are too young to understand what happens when love becomes war. Then teach me, Lyra said quietly, not as a queen but as a mother. For the first time in years, the Queen had no answer. That night, Lyra walked alone to the observation tower. Ethan was there, polishing his rifle even though he never used it anymore. He looked up as she entered. You've been quiet, he said softly. The council disapproves of you, she replied. They think you're a threat to our traditions. He gave a small, tired smile. I've heard worse. Lyra hesitated. They also want you gone. Ethan stopped moving. His eyes searched hers. And what do you want? The question hit her like a pulse. She looked down, fingers trembling. I don't know. Everything I was taught says I should hate you, but when I see what you've done, how you live, I can't. He stepped closer, careful, respectful. You don't have to decide anything now. I already have, she whispered. I want you to stay. He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. If I stay, I'll only bring you trouble. The council will turn against you. She took a step closer, her eyes glistening. Then let them see what courage looks like. Ethan exhaled slowly. You don't understand, Lyra. I'm just a soldier. You're a princess. Your people need you more than I ever could. She smiled sadly. And who says peace can't begin with a soldier and a princess? For a moment, silence hung between them, soft, fragile, full of emotion neither could name. Then Lyra reached out and took his hand. Her touch was light, trembling. His hand was rough, scarred, and warm. Two worlds met in that touch, and for the first time in Xaverian history, it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. The next morning, rumors spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered of the princess walking with the Terran at dawn. The guards spoke of laughter echoing from the gardens. The council grew restless. But the Queen, she remained silent. She watched them from afar, her heart torn between pride and fear. She saw how Lyra's eyes brightened when Ethan was near, how his presence had softened her spirit, yet strengthened her resolve. Late that night, the Queen confessed quietly to her advisor, she looks happier than I have seen her in years. The advisor bowed his head. Perhaps happiness is not the enemy, Your Majesty. The Queen looked toward the balcony where her daughter stood beside the human under the silver moons. Or perhaps, she whispered, it is the price of peace. In the garden below, Ethan and Lyra watched the night sky together. The stars shimmered like dust across a velvet sea. Do you ever miss Earth? She asked. Every day, he said, but lately not as much. Why? He turned to her, his eyes gentle, because I found something worth staying for. Her breath caught, and what is that? He smiled faintly, a reason to believe that even across galaxies, hearts can still understand each other. Lyra looked away, her cheeks glowing faintly in the moonlight. Ethan, she whispered. Yes. If I asked you to stay, not as a soldier, but as someone who belongs here, would you? He hesitated, then took her hand again. If you asked, I would. And as their fingers intertwined, the wind carried their quiet laughter through the garden, like a promise whispered to the stars. Two worlds, once enemies, now stood on the edge of something new. Something neither war nor politics could ever destroy. The air in Xaveria grew heavy. The stars still shone bright, but inside the royal palace, darkness was quietly gathering. What began as whispers had now turned into open defiance. The council, made up of proud nobles and war leaders, had reached their limit. They gathered in the grand hall, their silver robes rustling like waves of discontent. Holograms shimmered around them, showing images of the human soldier walking beside their princess. This cannot continue, one counselor hissed. The princess walks hand in hand with a Terran. Our people see this and question our honor. Another slammed his staff against the floor. A human among us was already an insult. Now he threatens our bloodline. The queen sat silently at the head of the chamber. Her face was calm, but her heart felt like stone. For weeks, she had tried to control the storm. For weeks, she had told herself that her daughter's heart would not divide the empire. But now the storm was here. "My queen," said the eldest counselor, bowing deeply, "the people are losing faith. The rebels are using this affection as proof that Zeveria has fallen under human control. We demand that the Terran be sent away immediately." The queen looked down. "And if I refuse?" The counselor's eyes hardened. "Then we will act in your stead." A chill ran through the room. Everyone understood what that meant. That night the queen visited her daughter's chamber. The door slid open silently, and she found Lyra sitting by the window, her silver hair glowing faintly under the moonlight. Ethan was there too, quietly repairing one of her damaged bracelets, his large hands working carefully on something so delicate. When the queen entered, both stood immediately. "Mother," Lyra said softly. "Your Majesty," Ethan said, bowing his head respectfully. The queen studied them for a moment, her daughter's eyes full of hope, the human's full of quiet strength. Then she spoke. "The council demands that you leave, Captain." Lyra's breath caught. "No." The queen raised her hand. "They fear what your presence represents. They claim you are dividing the people. If you stay, it may bring war again." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. "If my leaving keeps the peace, then I'll go." Lyra turned to him, her voice breaking. "You can't. They'll twist it into something else. They'll say you ran away." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter what they say. What matters is that no one else dies because of me." The queen watched silently as her daughter's hands trembled. There was love in that trembling, pure, painful, and undeniable. "Ethan," Lyra whispered, "you promised you stay." He reached for her hand gently. "And I meant it. But sometimes staying means letting go." The queen looked away, unable to bear the sight of her daughter's tears. She wanted to speak, to comfort, but her tongue felt heavy. Every choice she made now would hurt someone. Finally, she said softly, "You will leave at dawn." Lyra's voice rose, desperate. "Mother, please." "Enough," the queen's tone cracked like thunder. "You think I don't understand love? I do. But a queen does not get to choose love over duty. Neither will you." She turned sharply and left, her robes trailing behind her. But as the door closed, she heard her daughter sob quietly, and something in her chest broke again. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood on the palace balcony, looking over the quiet city. The stars stretched endlessly above, cold and distant. He thought about Earth, about blue skies, about laughter with his squad, about people he'd never see again. And then he thought about her, Lyra's smile, her courage, her faith in him when no one else dared. He clenched his fists. Leaving would protect her, but it would also tear her apart. Yet if he stayed, the entire empire could crumble. He was still lost in thought when he heard footsteps behind him. Lyra stood there, eyes red, but her voice steady. "If you're leaving, I'm coming with you." Ethan froze. "No, you can't." "Yes, I can," she said, stepping closer. "You saved my life, Ethan. You saved my people. Now I want to save something to us." He looked away, his heart aching. "You belong here. You're a leader, Lyra. Your people need you." She shook her head fiercely. "Then let them learn from you, from what you showed them. You gave them hope, showed them that strength isn't just about blood and power. You can't just walk away now." He sighed deeply. "It's not that simple." "It is," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's love." He turned to face her then, and for a moment, words failed him. He saw in her eyes the same fire that had kept him alive on the battlefield, the same courage that had drawn him to her in the first place. He reached out, brushing away her tears. "You deserve a world that won't burn for loving someone different." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his chest. "Then help me build it." He held her silently, as the stars turned above them. But fate is cruel to those who love across borders. Before dawn, an explosion shook the eastern courtyard. The alarms blared through the palace. Soldiers rushed through the halls. Ethan ran toward the smoke instinctively, shouting orders to guards who barely understood his language. The queen appeared from another corridor, her face pale. "Rebels," she breathed. "They've broken through the outer gates." Ethan grabbed a fallen guard's rifle. "Where, Lyra?" The queen's eyes widened. She was in her chamber. Without hesitation, Ethan sprinted through the collapsing halls, the roar of blasters echoing behind him. He kicked open the door to the princess's room and froze. Lyra stood cornered by 3 armed rebels, their weapons trained on her. Before they could fire, Ethan moved. He was faster than any of them expected. A shot grazed his arm, but he didn't stop. He slammed into the first rebel, disarming him, spun, and used the weapon to take down the others. The entire fight lasted seconds, but when it ended, blood stained the white marble. Lyra ran to him, shaking. "You're bleeding." He smiled weakly. "Just a scratch." The queen arrived moments later, breathless, and saw what he'd done. Her daughter safe, the rebels dead, and the human, once again, standing between them and death. For the first time, the queen bowed her head slightly. "Captain Cole." But before she could finish, a blaster shot rang out from the hall. Ethan turned instantly, pushing Lyra aside. The bolt struck him square in the shoulder. He staggered back, pain flashing across his face, but his voice stayed calm. "Stay behind me." The queen shouted for guards as Ethan fired back, driving the last rebel away. Then he sank to one knee, blood seeping through his uniform. Lyra caught him before he fell completely. "Ethan, stay with me." He managed a weak smile. "Told you not to worry about me." The queen knelt beside them, her voice shaking. "You saved her again. You saved us again." Ethan looked at her faintly. "That's what humans do." Tears filled her eyes. "I was wrong about your kind." He smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter, you see it now." Lyra held him tightly, her tears falling onto his face. "You can't leave me, not now." He brushed her cheek gently. "I'm not going anywhere, just rest a bit." Then his eyes fluttered closed. The queen called for medics, her voice cracking. Lyra held him close, whispering his name again and again. Outside, dawn broke over Zeveria. The city was safe once more, but inside the palace, hearts were breaking. The queen stood silently by the window hours later, watching the horizon burn with golden light. Her daughter sat beside Ethan's resting form, his hand still in hers. And for the first time, the queen whispered to herself, not as a ruler, but as a mother. Maybe this human was sent to remind us what love truly means. The palace was silent. The fires had died, the rebels were gone, but inside the grand infirmary of Zeveria, time itself seemed to stop. Ethan Cole lay motionless on a white healing bed, his chest rising and falling slowly under the hum of alien machines. His left arm was wrapped in glowing bands, his shoulder sealed with energy patches. The wound had gone deep, too close to the heart, the healers said. Lyra hadn't left his side for 3 days. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her silver hair tangled, her royal robes forgotten. She sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering words no one else could hear. "Wake up, please," she murmured. "You promised, you said you'd stay." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, the great princess of Zeveria looked small, just a girl in love, afraid of losing the one person who had shown her what strength truly meant. Outside the chamber, the queen stood by the doorway, watching silently. The sight of her daughter's pain tore through her. She had seen soldiers die, cities burn, empires rise and fall, but this was different. This was human. And she realized that was exactly what frightened her all along. Not the human's power, not his unpredictability, but his heart, because it was stronger than any weapon, and it had reached the one thing she had spent her life guarding, her daughter's soul. The queen entered quietly. The healers bowed and left, leaving her alone with Lyra and the human. Her daughter didn't even look up. "He saved us again," Lyra whispered, "even when we told him to leave." The queen walked closer, her voice soft. He's more stubborn than most generals I've known. Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. He's human, that's what they do. The queen looked at the man lying before her, pale, still, but alive. And in that moment, she remembered the words he had said before falling unconscious. You see it now. Yes, she did. She knelt beside her daughter, something no one had seen the Queen of Zeveria do for anyone. Her voice trembled. He is not one of us, yet I have never seen such loyalty. Lyra turned to her, hope flickering in her eyes. Then let him stay. The queen was silent for a long time. The sound of the machines filled the air. Then she said quietly, if he lives, then yes, he will stay, not as a soldier, not as a guest. She placed her hand gently over theirs, but as family. 2 more days passed before Ethan stirred. It was dawn, soft blue light filled the chamber, and the hum of the healing field dimmed. His fingers twitched, then his eyes slowly opened, adjusting to the brightness. The first thing he saw was her. Lyra sat there, asleep beside him, still holding his hand. Her head rested on his arm, her hair spilling like silver over the bed. For a moment, he just watched her, his tired heart filling with warmth. Then he whispered weakly, "Hey, princess." Her eyes snapped open. For a second she froze, then she gasped, tears spilling instantly. "Ethan." He smiled faintly, "Still here." She threw her arms around him, careful not to hurt his shoulder, crying softly into his chest. "You scared me, I thought I'd lost you." He chuckled weakly, "You think I'd go without saying goodbye?" She pulled back just enough to see his face, her voice shaking. "You almost did." He brushed a tear from her cheek. Guess humans are too stubborn to die when someone waiting for them. Behind them, the queen entered quietly, watching the scene. When Ethan tried to rise and bow, she raised a hand. "No," she said gently, "you have done enough bowing for us, Captain." Ethan looked confused. "Your Majesty." The queen stepped closer, her expression softer than ever before. "You saved my daughter's life twice. You saved our empire from tearing itself apart. I misjudged you. I misjudged your kind." He shook his head slowly. "You were protecting your people, I understand." She smiled faintly. "And yet you protected mine better than I ever did." Lyra looked between them, her heart pounding. "Mother, does this mean?" "Yes." The queen interrupted softly. "It means I was wrong. I once feared what humanity might bring to Zeveria. Now I see it brings what we have forgotten, hope." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. The queen stepped forward and did something no one in the room expected. She bowed her head slightly to him. "You have my respect, Captain Cole," she said firmly, "and my blessing." Lyra covered her mouth in shock. "Mother." Ethan's throat tightened. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, he just nodded. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The weeks that followed changed Zeveria forever. News of the Queen's acceptance spread across the empire. The human who once stood as an outsider now walked among the Zeverians as an honored ally. The people whispered stories of the Terran who bled for their princess, and soon those whispers turned into songs. Ethan recovered slowly, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He trained side by side with Zeverian soldiers, teaching them Terran tactics while learning their ancient ways of combat. He shared meals with them, repaired their machines, and laughed with their children. And Lyra, she was always by his side. They would often walk together through the royal gardens where it had all begun. The flowers glowed softly around them, the same as the night he first told her about Earth. One evening, she turned to him, smiling shyly. "The people are calling you HumanMight." He laughed. "That sounds dramatic." "It suits you," she teased. "They say you have the heart of 10 warriors." He smiled, looking out at the stars. "I only have one heart. It just found the right reason to keep beating." Lyra's eyes softened. "And what reason is that?" He looked at her, his voice low. "You." Her breath caught. "Ethan." He reached for her hand. "Lyra, I don't know what the future holds. Your world, my world, they're still learning to trust each other. but whatever comes next, I'll stand with you, always. She smiled through her tears. Then we'll build it together. They leaned closer, their foreheads touching gently, the glowing flowers reflecting in their eyes. Later that night, the queen watched them from her balcony. She could hear their laughter echoing softly through the gardens. For the first time in years, she felt peace, not as a ruler, but as a mother. Her advisors stepped beside her quietly. You've made history, my queen. Zeveria and Terra stand together. The queen smiled faintly. History was made when a human chose to protect what was not his own. The rest was only fate catching up. She turned her gaze to the stars. Human might is not about strength or war. It is about the courage to love what others fear. The wind carried her words softly into the night. In the weeks that followed, the royal archives recorded a new chapter, one unlike any before. It told the story of a soldier who came from a distant blue world, of a princess who defied her people for love, and of a queen who learned that hearts, not weapons, create peace. And somewhere beyond the stars, the humans of Terra heard the tale too. They called it the story of human might. But for those who lived it, it was simply the story of a man who refused to walk away and a princess who believed in him. As the twin suns rose again over Zeveria, Ethan and Lyra stood hand in hand on the palace balcony. He looked at the glowing horizon and whispered, "Guess peace looks better when you're not bleeding for it." Lyra laughed softly. "It's beautiful because you helped make it real." He turned to her, smiling, "Then let's keep it that way." And under the rising light of two suns, their hands tightened together, two souls from different worlds, united by the same truth. That love is the strongest force in the universe.